I accidentally hijacked someone else's community. That sounds a bit weird because I have my own community, my own Discord channel, but I will explain, and it's actually quite a cool story. Also, check out my hair. My girlfriend cut my hair, and now it looks different on one side than the other. She always wants me to not point that out so that not many people notice it. So basically, you should not look at it. Don't look at it. It's not worth the look. So what happened? Basically this. One day, I was talked to by Christian Benner, which has this Facebook group in which he mentors a lot of people in the high art of home recording. It's a German-only group though. So if you are not German-speaking, then I don't know if he would like that. He just wants to have a German community. I don't know. At least as far as I know. So we were talking a little bit and then he invited me to his Facebook group in which I just chill since then. So one day, someone made a post in which he said that he wants someone to master his track. Or I don't know, maybe he just said master but actually meant mixing. I'm not quite sure. Then a lot of people have told him that they want to do it, that they want to try mixing or mastering the song or whatever. Me as well. I had said I would even do it for free for the first time, just so that they can get an idea of how it sounds when I'm doing it. And then, I don't know, the other times it would be discussed what the price would be like. And yeah, a lot of helpful people in this group. And at some point, I just had the idea that we could all mix that song instead of just one person, so that the artist can just select the version that they like most. And then, I don't know, keep on working with that person from that moment on. And that would also be kind of a nice community challenge for the whole Facebook group, because it is kind of a social activity in which all of the people come together, try to find a way to solve the problems that are in the same track. And then we can learn from each other because everyone has had the same challenge, but solved it in a different way. And you know how different a mix can be. Like maybe someone feels like the kick is too weak, but instead of trying to boost the kick, they embrace the weakness and then instead push the focus more on the snare. Other people would try really hard to fix that kick, and then the snare would be more in the background, but then it would be a very nice combination of bass line and kick, but then maybe the pad falls behind or something like that. So everyone would have a different solution to the mix of the track. And I thought that was the greatest idea ever, and I really wanted to do that, so I kind of hyper-focused on it. However, at some point, the original artist thanked for all the answers, but then said that he already found a solution for this. So we couldn't make a community challenge with this track. I was not happy with that, because I really loved this idea. So I asked around the people in the group if one of them just has a track that they would like to have mixed, so that we can all mix it together and then learn from each other's mixes in which different directions the track could go when different people are mixing it. And one of them actually contributed with a track that we could all mix. Then a lot of time has passed and no one has really contributed a mix, even though everyone was like, oh yeah, I will totally contribute a mix to the challenge. Like, there were really like 20 people or something that said they would do something, but then no one did something. So I made another post in which I created an artificial deadline, which is the 1st of May, and then everyone should have their mix ready. And that actually led to people finally starting to mix the track. I also made my own mix and we all put it into the comment section of this post. And in this video, I will show you all the mixes and discuss them a little bit. So here we have the folder that I created for this community challenge. There is the original mix by the artist himself. There are 2 other mixes that have been sent in. There is my mix. And there are the individual tracks that have been worked with. So I would say, I think the most reasonable thing to do now is just to listen to the original mix.
Kiss your lips, but I still love her. Feel your body, hold another. Your smell is nice, but not like that. You trying hard, so I will respect. Hold on to you and don't let go. It passes like spring and snow. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my chat into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad. Not so bad, and I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime. forget my own regret. Cancel my chat into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime. If you want someone else, just do it. If you don't feel good, so that's it. Someday she won't me back, trust me, I'm not your lovely hijack. Then I have to go, and anyway, you won't understand and overplay. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my chat into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime. I'm dawning slowly myself, while you hold my head above surface. Fear of going under, you keep me alive. Give me what little I need, it cuts like a knife. A translation, a train passing by. It won't leave at all, so please don't cry. Make me forget my own regret. Cancel my chat into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime.
As you can hear, a very cool track. It has quite a rock flavor, which is why I liked it as material for such a challenge, because, you know, it has all of this stuff that really challenges you, like individual drum mics where you have a lot of bleed, guitars and vocals that are all in the same frequency range, and generally a cool vibe, so that you actually have material that kind of works right out of the box and you just have to make it better. Of course, there were also a lot of problems, like especially in nowadays times with declining attention spans. It is quite a long track with 4 minutes where the parts are very repeating, but that's also a strength of the track because the arrangement was very clear. You could always like predict what's going to happen next, and it just felt super nice in place. And yeah, there was some nice details, like a nice little guitar solo, or like these parts where there were vocals with different singing approaches that are layered on top, which was very fun to mix. Stuff like that. There was a lot of fun stuff in it. The timing was a little bit weird on some of these tracks, and I'm not quite sure why, but I will talk about that more in depth later. First of all, we will listen to the other mixes alongside with the comments that have been made, because my initial idea with this challenge was that we can all learn from each other. So I kind of expected everyone to kind of write a text about how they felt when it comes to this project, so that we can actually learn something from the way they are talking about the project. However, I must say the people didn't write texts when they dropped their track. They just dropped it with single sentences mostly, but I will still read them so that we can like get a basic idea of what kind of feeling they had about this whole project. So Sebi Sky tried making a mix. It only took him 30 minutes because he didn't have a lot of time, but he said that it was a lot of fun. So let's listen to the track. What can you do with 30 minutes?
Kiss your lips, but I still love her. Feel your body, hold another. Your smell is nice, but not like that. You trying hard, so I will respect. Hold on to you and don't It passes like spring and snow. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my chat into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad and not so bad, and I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime. I told you again than before. You didn't listen anymore. Was open to you, you believe in change. My thoughts are all over and out of range. Even when I'm with you, even when my words aren't true. Make me forget my own regret. Cancel my chat into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad and not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime. Someone else, just do it. If you don't feel good, so that's it. Someday she want me back, trust me. I'm not your lovely hijack. Then I have to go, and anyway you won't understand and overplay. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my chat into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad and not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime. I'm drowning slowly in myself while you hold my head above surface. Fear of going under, you keep me alive. Give me what little I need, it cuts like a knife. A translation, a train passing by. It won't leave at all, so please don't cry. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my chat into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad and not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime.
Alright, I took some notes while listening to this. So basically, one thing that immediately stands out, like as a difference between the two mixes, is the beginning of the track, where in the original intention of the artist there is like a clear vibe in the guitar, while here there is just the DI signal. So let's compare these two with each other really quickly. Against, I mean, okay, there was a little bit of reverb, but it was reverb on the DI sound, so the flavor was not quite defined yet. And that's actually a problem that I also struggled with in the beginning when I was making this mix. The artist gave us the tracks with a lot of these guitars. They didn't actually have a sound, they were just DI, direct input recordings of the guitar. And I personally always find that problematic when I'm mixing rock tunes, because I always assume that the band has sort of an intention where they want to go with a vibe, and usually this is very largely defined by the way they are shaping their guitar sounds, and now there was no shaping of the guitar sounds. So I kind of felt like I had to put my own interpretation on that, but it is kind of unclear, because usually the job of mixing is not quite to define the vibe, but just to find the sweet spot of the already existing vibe. So it makes sense that some people who are confronted with material like that could think that the band actually intends to use the DI signal because they want to have a very true to the original guitar tone or whatever. And since this doesn't make it very clear what should be done, it kind of highlights how important it is that in a normal mixing situation, the mixing engineer can talk back to the artist and discuss that with them. In this challenge, that was not really a thing because we all tried to make our mixes independent of each other and with the same conditions. So we didn't talk with the artist about how they want to have it, but just did the thing that we thought was correct. But normally it would make sense if you could go back to it. Also, I'm personally a fan of already mixing a track while I'm composing and sound designing it. So having the mixing process and even the mastering process in the same session as the composing and everything. And also that has the advantage that you can always go back to an earlier stage if you notice that something doesn't quite work in the later stage. And yeah, that would also have helped here, because if you imagine like you are sitting in the same room as this was recorded and you are tasked with mixing the track, then you could already, while recording the stuff, go to the band members and say, wait up, can we record that again, but like already print the vibe? Or maybe you can record the DI signal, but then define a vibe directly afterwards or something. Or you define the vibe before, but then still record the DI signal so that you have more control in the DAW, but then you directly print the vibe as well and bounce it into a new track so that you have both of them available. Those are all options that you can do then. And yeah, it makes sense that bands don't always think about that when they are just composing their tracks. They might also be confused about what kind of signals the mixing engineers actually want to have. And yeah, these kind of misunderstandings can just get out of the way if you just start working with your mixing engineers early on in the project and not just when you've already finished all your recordings. So yeah, Sebi Sky decided to just keep the line in as true to the sound as possible and just added some reverb. Another thing that I noticed was that I really liked the drum sound. I really liked how Sebi Sky was able to put the right cymbal into the right space, because that's something that I didn't quite manage in my mix. This project has a lot of tracks on top of each other and it can be quite challenging to find the right space for each of them without making it sound too overcrowded. So I think Sebi Sky did a nice job, at least with the drums, to have them just sound really natural like drums, but still have enough power for the rest of the music, which can be a compromiseful process. And I think that was done quite well here. So overall, the tone of everything was very wide and aggressive, a very outgoing sound. Like it sounded kind of rough around the edges, but it makes sense for a mix that only took 30 minutes. I noticed about the guitar solo that even though it had a nice reverb, it wasn't strong enough for the rest of the music. Like the dynamics fell down sometimes and then it just didn't feel like it contributed to the song a lot. So I think there wasn't enough thought that was put into the solo, but that makes sense for a mix that only takes 30 minutes because details are just the things that fall behind when you don't take the time. And what I also didn't quite like was that the vocals sounded very nasal. What is nasal in English?
Nasal.
Nasal, because that is typically something that happens when you are boosting the vocals in the 3K area or something that is slightly above 3K too much. And yeah, when you are mixing a track, you just want to get the sweet spot out of it in a very easy way. Then you just tend to boost that area because it is the same area that we as human beings often perceive as a hyped up area. Like when music wants to sound very hyped, then it usually has a lot of stuff going on in that area. However, if the vocals are the only things that have the power in that area, then it sounds a little bit weird. So I can understand this mixing decision, but I would still have at least gave some other tracks something around that frequency range as well in order to kind of justify the boost. And otherwise I would have gone for a less hyped up mix so that the vocals fit more to the rest of the music. They were definitely compressed, but it was like kind of traditional. But that's Meckern auf hohem Niveau. Can Google Translate actually translate that? Complaining at a high level. Okay, so overall for a 30 minutes mix, I think it's pretty good. It has most of the levels right. Like sometimes the vocals popped out a little bit too much, but I mean it's 30 minutes, so what can we say? It's not something that was taken too seriously anyway. So let's just go to the next mix by Holgi Loewensenf. When Holgi Loewensenf dropped the track, left out the acoustical guitar because it sounded total kaputt, very broken. It was better to just completely ignore that track. Now, before playing back this mix, I want to discuss this mixing decision. I think it's very important for an artist to be open about completely scraping certain tracks, because a lot of times when you are making music, from a musician point of view, you just feel like, oh, I want to add more and more and more. I want to add all of these sounds. They add so much color to the track. The colors are just basically flowing around from all sides, all together at all times. In my face, it's really great. But when you're actually mixing the tracks and then you just find out, wait up, some of these tracks can be enhanced to their sweetest position so much that if I have all of these tracks together, then some of them are just not in the foreground enough anymore. They just don't get what they deserve. It's kind of like you suddenly notice that some of these tracks have more energy in them than you anticipated them to have. So you just want that, you want to highlight that, so you want to leave some other stuff out. However, it often happens that when you kind of pitch this idea to the artists, they feel shocked because they already learned to love all of the recordings they made, and they don't want any of that to be completely put out of the mix because they cannot imagine how they would improve the situation. It is also one of the big reasons why I would always say work with a mixing engineer already early on in the project. They can tell you something is going to be much greater than it is right now, and that's why the other things that have been recorded might have to fall behind or even left out. As an artist, you have to be really strong when you are working with a mixing engineer because they are very honest. When you have a good mixing engineer, they are honest to you and they will tell you maybe that track is not actually needed. So I really hope that things like that don't come off as disrespectful, like I don't like your artistic vision, I just want to throw out the tracks, but rather be seen as this person really took your track seriously and try to solve a certain problem by removing a track. Now let's actually listen to the music.
But I still love her. Feel your body, hold another. Your smell is nice, but not like that. You trying hard, so I will respect. Hold on to you and don't let go. It passes like spring and snow. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my check into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad and not so bad, and I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals your wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime. Told you again and before, you didn't listen anymore. It's open to you, you believe in change. My thoughts are all over and out of range. Even when I'm with you, even when my words sound true. Make me forget my own regret. Cancel my chat into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad and not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime. Someone else, just do it. If you don't feel good, so that's it. Someday she want me back, trust me. I'm not your lovely hijack. Then I have to go, and anyway you won't understand and overplay. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my chat into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad and not so bad when I am glad. As I means love is a crime. I'm dawning slowly in myself while you hold my head above surface. Fear of going under, you keep me alive. Give me what little I need, it cuts like a knife. A translation, a train passing by. It won't leave at all, so please don't cry. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my chat into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime.
Alright, I was a little bit disappointed, I must say, because this mix also used the DI signal everywhere and just added some reverb. I was looking forward that at least one person would actually make something from the DI signals and add some unique vibe to that, instead of staying very true to the original sound. Because let's be honest, there are not a lot of rock tracks out there where all of the sounds are just DI signals, or are there even any? I don't know. But overall, I think this mix just sounded a little bit more balanced in general, and you can really hear that it was not just a 30-minute mix, which is pretty cool. For example, what I really liked about this mix was that the strings were way more in the background than the other mix. Because these strings, they didn't sound very modern, they were like very old school strings that sound like they come from a keyboard or something like that. And I personally also found that to be challenging to mix into the sounds that were otherwise very natural. So it makes sense to put them far in the background and put more focus on the vocals. I could clearly hear that this was a very intentional mixing decision that was made with, well, a lot of intention. I could also hear that Holgi Loewensenf tried to put more focus on the bass line, because the bass line had a lot of sweet overtones and, you know, the sound when they are going over the slides, and that's pretty cool. You always try to get that into the mix somehow. Only problem is when you get that too much into the mix, it fights with the other low mid elements of the mix, which in this case were the guitars and in some parts the low vocals. And I found that to be a little bit stressful at times. So I don't know, in moments like this, I would advise going over that with some multiband compression or some sidechain multiband compression even, or both even. Maybe that just felt like overkill to Holgi, or I don't know, but that's something that I would have added to really finish that off. But yeah, I can just say that I found that part about the mix also challenging. I found the reverb on the vocals a little bit too excessive at times. Like, it was very obvious that there was some reverb on the vocals, which kind of distracted from the vocals themselves. That's kind of hard to nail, to be honest. I also have a lot of problems with reverb sometimes, because oftentimes it can be hard to find just the exact reverb sound that is needed for a certain context. You want a reverb sound that doesn't make the people notice that there is reverb, but just one that makes sense. It can even be a very strong and loud reverb, one that is very audible, but it just has to have just the right vibe. And if the vibe is just slightly off, then even a very quiet reverb can put itself into the foreground in an annoying way, and that makes it very hard to nail. Also, that there is like no definite solution to that. It's not something like queuing or compression where there are more or less quantifiable solutions to each problem, but reverbs are just super all over the place and you just have to feel them in order to find a solution, which is why I cannot say what exactly was the thing that kind of stood out to me too much. What I did like was that Holgi made an attempt to put a new detail at the last parts of the track, which was that delay send. And it was not a delay that was constantly pushing out the delay, but it was just that individual words were being thrown into the delay send, and that made it a little bit more dynamic and added a psychedelic vibe to the end. It also felt a little bit random though, because I was not expecting that. And yeah, sometimes these delay sends, they just feel a little bit forced when you are adding them to tracks that don't have any experimental sounds before. Like when the most experimental thing in a whole track is just that there is reverb on some sounds, and then suddenly there are delay sends that try to be psychedelic. That can be a little bit of a hard transition, but I do like that there was an attempt to add psychedelic effects, because all in all, this sound, with its almost surf pop vibe, it does deserve some psychedelic sounding effects. So the overall idea of these delay sends is definitely a good one. Also, because the track is very long, as I said before, so it makes sense to just think that it would make sense to add a little bit of variation at some point. And that was an attempt to add variation, which is appreciated. Hello, this is me on an entirely different day, because I had to squeeze in one other mix that has been sent in that I just didn't see when I started to make that video. So here is the mix of Becke. Let's go.
Kiss your lips, but I still love her. Feel your body, hold another. Your smell is nice, but not like that. You trying hard, so I will respect. Hold on to you and don't let go. It passes like spring and snow. Make me forget my own regret. Cancel my jet into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new terms instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and not so bad, and I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals your wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime. I told you again and before, you didn't listen anymore. Was open to you, you believe in change. My thoughts are all over and out of range. Even when I'm with you, even when my words aren't true. Make me forget my own regret. Cancel my jet into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime. Someone else, just do it. If you don't feel good, so that's it. Someday she want me back, trust me. I'm not your lovely hijack. Then I have to go, and anyway you won't understand and overplay. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my jet into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new terms instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals your wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime. I'm drowning slowly in myself, while you hold my head above surface. Fear of going under, you keep me alive. Give me what little I need, it cuts like a knife. A translation, a train passing by, it won't leave at all, so please don't cry. Make me forget my own regret. Cancel my jet into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad. Time heals your wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime.
Alright, I'm very glad that I noticed this mix, because it got very nice in my opinion. Just like with the other mixes, I'm not quite sure if there has been a change on the DI signals of the guitar. I think in this case there was a little bit of amplifiers added here and there, but it was very subtle. And there were no excessive reverbs or anything. I think there were reverbs, but they were just in place, so it made sense. At least nothing that like stood out or anything. So if there was reverb, then the reverb game was really good. I also noticed, for example, that the snare had a very nice punch, and I can tell from experience with this material that it was not easy to let the snare have a good punch, because there was just one snare mic and everything had a lot of bleed in all of the mics. So yeah, that's something that I highly appreciate here. Generally, the vocals were really clean, and I think they were very clean because they were compressed really hard, because at some moments I heard that the breaths were really loud. Like sometimes the singer was like and I was like, okay, you can cut that out, you know. But I mean, at least it caused the general vocal sound to be really good, and also the overall mix in general, like it was very good, even though the sounds weren't changed a lot. And you will see in my mix soon that I did change the sounds a lot, and that's why I kind of feel like that it has to be done. But yeah, no one except me felt like that, so I guess that's one way to see it as well. In the beginning, it sounded very playful with this intro, with the low pass filter sweep and the delay. Very psychedelic. However, that the fact that it never came back in the whole arrangement kind of made it stood out a little bit much. Like I would have expected it to be referenced somewhere else in some other part, maybe. Again, I don't know, to make that the identity of this mix or something. But it did solve the problem that the raw material comes in very instantaneously. What I found special about this mix was that I could actually hear the acoustical guitar. And yeah, one of the other participants of this challenge said that they didn't like the acoustic guitar. And I also didn't put the acoustic guitar very much into the foreground. So actually hearing the acoustic guitar quite clearly in this mix was very educational, at least for me, because it showed me that one can actually have the perspective that the acoustic guitar here was a very good element that needs to be more in the foreground of the mix and still makes sense in the context of all of the elements together. So my opinion is not the major opinion of opinions, but just one of the possibilities how you can perceive the material. Now about the low voice, in the parts where there is a low voice, I think there was some sort of frequency shifter or something. Something about that low voice was kind of floating around between the speakers. It was a very psychedelic effect, a little bit like it was referencing the psychedelic nature of the intro with that low pass delay combo. But since it's a completely different effect, it was a little bit vague if that was the intention of this effect. However, I really liked the sound. I must say though, part always sounds very empty when that guitar in the background doesn't have a lot of drive, which is why I added a lot of drive in my version of the mix. But if this was my version of the mix with a frequency shift on the lower voice and everything, I would have also appreciated more drive on the guitar. That would have sounded very nice and rounded off this initial idea to make this sound psychedelic and floaty. Becke gave me 2 mixes actually, and I only want to show the other mix a little bit because it was a little bit of a gimmick. So apparently Waves has released a plugin called CLA MixHub. I'm personally not a Waves user, so I have no idea what's going on there. I guess it's some sort of channel strip or anything. Oh, you can even change the sequence of the effect. So that's more control in an analog looking channel strip than you usually have. So it is understandable that one could ask the question, is CLA MixHub enough to mix a full track? And I think that is the question that Becke wanted to answer by also trying to mix the entire song only with MixHub. So let's quickly listen to some of the parts of that.
Kiss your lips, but I still love her. Feel your body hold another. Your smell is nice, but not like that. On new terms instead. Don't be sad, I know it smells a crime. Make me forget my own regret. Cancel.
Okay, most of the parts that are in this track were kind of covered by these little sections. I didn't want to listen to the whole mix because Thomas Becke said to me that the other mix was the main mix and this was just a little experiment. However, we could hear that Waves MixHub seems to be a very capable channel strip because this mix also sounds good. However, it was lacking the creative input from Becke, for example at the start with the low pass filter and the delay, and the frequency shifter in the middle part. And that really shows the importance of using third-party plugins, in my opinion. A lot of times people are just like, oh, I just use my favorite channel strip, or I just use the native stock plugins of my DAW, and that's all that I need. But I actually think that the whole magic of making music, it only really shows itself if you are open to try all kinds of stuff. And that's basically why we have plugins, because plugins can be anything. And that's pretty cool, and that makes a mix stand out from another mix. While it's always kind of fascinating when people try to find a way to standardize certain processes, I do think it is more important than ever that everyone will just have their own footprint on the music by having their favorite plugins. And that's why it's cool when people not just use a certain channel strip and that's it, but actually have a collection of stuff that they like most. Now I want to show you my track. But I gotta say before, I interpreted the Soul Challenge very differently. Like, I came up with vibes for all of the tracks, so my mix sounds very different, even from the original artist's vision. It might be that I went too far, but I just did what I would have done if that was my own track. That's how I always treat mixing tracks, because I strongly believe that if you just put your whole heart into a mix, then it has to be good, because then it becomes a sound that you would actually listen to yourself. That's my philosophy about mixing, but a lot of times people find that I'm going too far with that, so I respect this opinion. But still, I want to show you my track, and maybe you can let me know in the comments if you like it, or what would you criticize about my decisions. And I will also criticize some of my decisions myself after we have listened to it.
Still love her. Feel your body hold another. Your smell is nice, but not like that. You trying hard, so I will respect. Hold on to you and don't let go. It passes like spring and snow. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my change into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and not so bad, and I am glad, as I am sad, as I am sad.
Time heals all wounds, maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth, nothing remains, love is a crime.
My church into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and not so bad when I am glad, as I am sad, as I am sad.
Time heals all wounds, maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth, but nothing remains, love is a crime.
Someone else just do it. Don't feel good, so that's it. Someday she want me back, trust me. I'm not your lovely hijack. Then I have to go, and anyway, you won't understand and overlay. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my chant into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and not so bad when I am glad, as I am sad, as I am sad.
Time heals
too much turned into white mirrors black. It's time to bet on new times instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad, and I'm so bad when I am glad, as I am sad, as I am sad.
Time heals all wounds, maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth, but nothing remains, love is a crime.
Yeah, that was my track, and now I'm going to open the project to talk about it. So the first thing that you probably noticed was that I just completely scrapped the idea of using DI samples entirely, because as I said before, I just don't believe that anyone wants to listen to a rock track that has DI samples. So basically this sound became this sound. And one of the most important decisions here was to add a layer of different pitch shifters. Because the pitch shifters, especially when they are going in octaves, really enrich the whole spectrum with interesting information. You have some of them going down, some of them going up, and also a layer with just chorus and a layer with a frequency shifter, and they all come together at different levels. That's why this sound got a little bit more interesting. I just hope that it found the right vibe. The reason why I made this mixing decision is because this guitar plays 7th chords. I always associate them with a chorusy vibe, like something laid back for the beach, and those are the kinds of sounds where I want to hear chorus modulation and pitch shifters and stuff like that. So that was just a natural decision for me. Now the next major decision that I made was actually removing all the drums from the intro. So the vocals come in like this, just with a bass.
Kiss your lips, but I still love her.
Because otherwise it would have sounded like this.
Kiss your lips, but I still love her.
Yeah, and I just felt like that was a little bit too much. It's like, ooh, wait up. Not so much at the same time, please. And yeah, that might also be because the artists didn't add their own flavor to the sounds before sending them in. Because when all of the sounds are just super weak and have DI sounds and stuff like that, it always feels like you have to add a lot of stuff for it to make sense. But I think once you actually carve out the sweet spot of all of the sounds, you just have to reduce the arrangement in order to still make sense. And that's why I did it, and that's why I feel like this was a sensible solution.
Asses like spring and snow.
So then obviously I was asking myself, how can I solve this problem? Because now that the drums are cut to a different place, I had to find a way to introduce them in a meaningful way, because there is no fill-in that I can just use. So I decided to use a filter automation on the drums. And I think that did a very good job here.
Asses like spring and snow.
Even though I gotta say, it stands out a little bit as more of an EDM move in a rock tune, so it might be that it was a little bit too much of a hard decision. Let's listen to the snare in solo. So this snare doesn't sound very exciting. It sounds very thin, and that was kind of sad. There is also just one mic. Sometimes when people record drums, they record the top and the bottom part of the snare with individual mics so that you can mix the boom kind of sound with a tish kind of sound. But this time you just had to carve out the sweet spot from a single mic. That has the advantage that there is less potential for phase issues between the tracks, but it also means that you have to get a little bit creative with the processing of the snare. So I made it sound like this. And yeah, that made it stand out from the rest of the drums a little bit. It became a little bit artificial. It became a little bit more pop instead of pure rock, because of that decision. And sometimes it also didn't make a lot of sense, like when there were these drum rolls, that was always a little bit over the top when those appeared. Like, I mean, listen to that in context. I think that those were always moments when the snare put itself into the foreground a little bit too hard, but overall and in general, I think it was a good idea to kind of really squash that snare so that it has a nice sound. And you know, the snare is always in the center of the rhythm, so you really wanted to have the coolest sound ever in a track like that.
Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my check into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new times instead.
I hope you know what I mean. Like, this was a very creative decision. Some people would argue that it's not mixing anymore, but I think it was just needed. What else did I do? Yeah, some multiband expansion. Yeah, I cleaned up the snare from the bleed that was in it so that I can distort it harder afterwards, because when a track has too much bleed and then you are trying to enhance the sweet spot with distortion and stuff like that, then you also get the other sounds to be more in the foreground. So here you can see a very extreme wave shaper. This wave shaper is oversampled, so it often sounds very nice. And then there is Saturn with a very surgical curve. There is one band only for the fundamental frequency, 3 bands for all the overtones, and 1 band for the stuff that shouldn't be distorted. So yeah, that's something that I like to do on drums that really need a lot of work. And then there is this huge FX layer where I have a lot of stuff going on. Like, I have an instance of the grater, which is a great compressor. I have Presswork, which is a great compressor. I have Free Clip, which is a clipper. Clipping can sound very nice on drums because it adds the high-end sizzle. And when you are mixing it in very quietly in the background, then you just get a little bit more of this into the sound. Can sometimes help a lot. You have to be a little bit careful though. This thing has oversampling, and when you turn on oversampling, obviously you get less aliasing, which is nice, but it's also harder to mix it with the other signals because this oversampler is not using linear phase filters. This plugin is made for live purposes, but I found that to be quite pleasant in this example, because the phasing that is introduced rolls off the high end a little bit, which is nice. And then I had a layer with just the dry signal, and I had a layer with a room reverb. So I put the delay down a lot and all of the other settings as well. A lot of damping. So this is a very subtle room reverb setting. And I have a setting with a very strong transient shaper. So I had a layer that I can dial in to at least give this whole squashed sound a little bit of a punchy note in it. Yeah, that was my idea about the snare processing. And I think while it was not perfect, could definitely be done a little better. It did solve the problem quite well. Those were the tracks in the chorus, by the way, so you can really see how much stuff was going on. This was the acoustic guitar. As you can hear, it doesn't sound very acoustic anymore because I was distorting it very hard. But then there were the strings and the violin and the cello, and they were all together in my strings group, where I will just turn off all of the effects now so that you hear what it sounded like before. You can really hear how that was just some random keyboard. Like, it was not very well defined compositionally, because, for example, here it was just playing and then suddenly all the notes were taken off and then the sound dropped and then it came back on the next notes. Like someone who just played it with a keyboard and then didn't quantize the notes to be just perfect. It just doesn't sound like someone who would actually play that on a violin, but just like someone who played it on a keyboard and then didn't quantize it. So obviously kind of a cheap sound. Sounds a bit like a Yamaha keyboard that was just played and then set and forget. So I had to mask that to make it sound cool. I decided to only take the mids of the whole spectrum. I added some tape effects to make it sound lo-fi. I added strong reverb. I distorted it like heavy, and then I panned it a little bit because I put panning on a lot of sounds. I really like when the sounds have their place in the stereo field when it comes to rock tracks, because rock tracks are not played in the club. They don't need to be mono compatible, so you can actually pull these kind of things off. Yeah, and then it just sounds like a vibe, and that's how I added a vibe to that. Do I have here a Vox guitar? So I called these the Vox guitars because they play the same melody as the Vox.
Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my chat into...
I think this was a DI signal as well when I got it. Let's check that out. So you really see why I was mad about all of these DI signals. They really don't tell me what the artist wants them to sound like. I had to make all of these decisions myself, and that's always dangerous because you want to have a sound at the end that the artist also likes. So if only one of these decisions are not what the artist had in mind, then you already have a problem. That's why I would always tell the artist not to give the mixing engineer just the DI signal. The DI signal can be useful if the mixing engineer just wants to add a little bit of their own flavor with guitar rig or whatever, but there should always be a track that just already cements the general idea, at least. So here I put away most of the frequencies, just took some of the mid-range, I fuzzed it, I added some reverb, compression, panning, and some strong distortion again, and then it became this. On this track, I think what made most of the difference was the chorus at the start. The first algorithm of the Chorus Plus module of Bitwig has this nice property that it uses triangle waves for the internal vibratos, which sounds like a pitch shifter that is alternating between pitching up and down all the time. And when you have a lot of vibratos doing that at the same time, which is how chorus modulation is often defined, then it just sounds really crazy, and I like that here.
Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my chat into white.
There is one problem that is kind of part of the whole song. Like, I have no idea how the artist pulls it off, and I have to have some harsh words here with the artist. But the timing on all of these tracks is just terrible. Like, this note, for example, was supposed to be on the 1, and you can see it is like a 64th note too early. And that's the case for like most of these tracks. You can barely see any note where you can really say, okay, that's on a certain time. All of these seems to be just guessed around the time where they should be. That makes the overall feeling of the song sound very rushed. It's hard to chill to the song because of that. It always sounds like it tries to have some tension because of all these timing issues. Not just on the vocals, but also like on the bass line and on most of the guitars. And that's why it was hard to mix the guitars on the same volume into each other. Because if I had done that, then you would have heard all of these transients clashing against each other in time. And that's why I found that it was very non-beneficial to give us these tracks in this form. It would have been better if the musicians had just recorded it again, but trying to be very good on time. I'm not saying everything has to be on time perfectly all the time, especially not on a track like this that should sound a little bit laid back, but it should be a little bit less obvious and more intentional. It didn't sound very intentional. So what I did is I just decided to completely ignore all timing issues, because otherwise it would have taken years to mix this. I would have had to do it for all tracks, and then maybe it would have messed with some of the other qualities because of all the time stretching artifacts that I would have added. So I decided to ignore all timing issues and instead just focus on the sound. But just so that you know, there could be more that can be done if the mixing process was already intertwined with the recording process, because then the band could get feedback on that and just be told like, okay guys, kind of cool vibe, but you have to do that again, or else it will not be very usable in this form. So yeah, enough of the harsh words. Now let's talk about something cool again. Here we have this bridge that always came up after regular intervals. It sounds like this.
Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth.
I made a very heavy decision here on the lead sound. As you can imagine, the lead sound itself just sounds like this. So you have this very groovy sound that just wants you to go and it sounds a little bit like a biker gang cruising by, but it doesn't have nice drive. So what I did was, first of all, I started it off with a +7 pitch shifter, because otherwise it would have sounded like this. Adding a +7 pitch shifter is always nice on guitars like that really try to be very strong, because it adds the sensation of a power chord. Now the next thing I did was adding fuzzploid to make it fuzzy. Great plugin for these kind of situations. Then I added even more pitch shifters. And then the thing that probably also stood out in the spectrum analyzer when we were listening to the full track was phases, because you could see these lines going up and down, and those were the notches of the phaser. So this makes it sound very psychedelic. It also has some other functions in my opinion. By notching out certain frequencies, it also makes it thinner. And in some cases that can be very beneficial when you have the feeling that the sound is just too strong. It just pushes out so hard and puts itself in the foreground everywhere. You kind of want it to be foreground, but you would like it to come a little bit more intimate from behind and have a little bit more breath to it. That's always a sign that you could use a phaser. And if you want the phaser to be more subtle, you could go down with the feedback setting and it would sound like this. But I didn't want it to be subtle. Yeah, lots of distortion as always. By the way, whenever you see duck from kick, it is just Pro C sidechain from the kick drum with some setting. I really like about Bitwig that you can rename the tracks to highlight the intention of an effect. That can come in handy when you have extremely long effect chains with layers in them and stuff like that. It is a feature that I was always missing when I was still using Cubase. The lead guitar wasn't even the best part about it. Best part is the vocal performance.
Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine.
And the vocal performance consists of two vocals. This deep vocal.
Time heals all wounds.
And the high vocal.
Time heals all wounds.
So what I found challenging about that was that when I was mixing this, I kinda leaned towards making the normal vocal louder first. And as we have heard before, the original artist also had this, the loudest thing, and the other mixes also put the deep voice much into the background as something that you can barely notice. But then, after mixing this track a lot and being pretty unhappy about whatever I came up with, I noticed that the deep vocals are actually much cooler than the high vocals, even though they sound a little bit like a voice that tries to be a different voice. But if you really listen to it, you notice that it's just a great vocal sound.
Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime.
And the reason for that is because the vibrato on some of these notes is just incredible. Like, look at this note. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. This is so all over the place that Melodyne didn't even realize what general note that was. Instead came up with the idea that it's all of these notes, even though it's probably just this. You can see this is such a clean sine wave vibrato. Like, this is a very controlled vibrato. One of the best vibratos in a vocal performance that I ever had the pleasure of mixing. And when I realized that this is the case, I knew that this track was the one that had to be in the foreground in this part.
I am sad. Time heals all wounds. Maybe yours, maybe mine. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Nothing remains, love is a crime.
Yeah. So let's make a jump forward to the guitar solo. The guitar solo is basically the only thing in the whole arrangement that makes it sound a little bit different for a while. So I perceived that as an opportunity to refresh the ears from all the samey stuff going on all the time. So what was the sound that I came up with? So one thing that I did was I just kept the same sound that I already had for the lead melody before, just so that there is still a little bit of consistency. You know, so it goes on with the same sound basically. But then I copied the whole audio into another track so that I have a new sound additionally to that. And this new sound in solo sounds like this. So as you can hear, this is actually a very plucky sound and it wouldn't work just by itself. but it works together with the lead sound because the lead sound is more of a sustained experience. So what did I do here? I took out only some of this very high mid-range. Then I fuzzed it, and then I had a layer with a compressor and with a delay, but it's a very short delay, so kind of a slap back thing. And it went into the grader to be really smashed. I gotta say, the sensation that this sounds like a reverb is because this delay lets you dial in some diffusion into the feedback path, which is done here. So even though this says it is a delay, it was actually meant more as a reverb. Yeah, and then together it sounds like this. So there was another extreme decision at the end where I decided that since the song is extremely long, there has to be some variation at the end. And my way of adding variation is to let the listener chill a little bit more by removing the drums.
Please let off, so please don't cry. Make me forget my own regrets. Cancel my change into white where it's black. It's time to bet on new terms instead. Don't be sad, I know it's mad. And not so bad when I am glad. As I am sad, as I am sad.
Time heals your
Well, not quite removing the drums, but actually just adding a filter automation that makes it sound muffled and puts it out of the foreground for a while, just so that you can hear the rhythm pumping in the background a little bit, but you don't really hear it as drums. And also I took away the bass. So yeah, this part really put the vocals into the foreground at the end to just put a focus on the actual lyrics and on the beauty of the vocals. Because since this is a track that constantly has vocals, I just assumed that they want the vocals to be one of the most foregroundish elements here. This is not a chill out track where the vocals are just there to kind of fill the tonality space. Yeah, there's one other thing that I want to talk about really quickly before summing this up, which is the drums. I think that one of the things that the other artists did better than me, which was kind of getting the right cymbals right. As you can hear, I added multiband expansion to make space between the hits. And while that sounded good in the chorus parts where there is no right cymbal, whenever the right cymbal actually appears, it sounds a little bit weird because it sounds like a right cymbal just is being pushed down in dynamics quickly, which is just something that no right cymbal ever does. And when you're listening to it closely, even in the full mix, you will notice that it sounds a little bit unnatural and not like a right cymbal should sound. I didn't find a good solution for that because when I don't multiband expand this, then the whole mix was just too full. It was too in your face. The solution that I was seeking for here was to get the drums out of the way in between the hits so that the other sounds can shine more. And that was definitely solved by this multiband expander, but it also kind of made the drums sound a little bit too unnatural. So that was definitely something that I found was solved better by the other people. Alright, so now let's sum up this activity. I found it was a nice learning experience because, as I said, there were just certain things that I really liked to hear in the mixes of the other person. Problems were solved in a very different way, so I could definitely learn something from it. However, I wish more people had actually sent in a mix because there were a lot of people who said that they would want to mix it, and then in the end I just got a few mixes. And then I would have liked the people who actually give a mix to take this a little bit more seriously, like not make a 30 minutes mix, because I must be honest, it's a bit of a waste of time to even listen to something that wasn't taken seriously. And even Holgi, who definitely took some more time to figure this out, didn't come up with the idea that a track that just consists of a bunch of DI signals is not something that you would listen to realistically. And I would wish that if we ever repeated this challenge that is very interesting in its core, then I would like everyone to take this a little bit more seriously, put a little bit more thought into their work. I would actually like to repeat this at some point very much because I see a lot of potential in community events like this. I don't know if we should do them in the Facebook group, to be honest, because Facebook is just not the best medium for that. I prefer using Discord because there you can make extra channels for all of the topics, like you can have a channel where the people drop their mixes. You can have a channel where you can discuss the material, or you can have a channel where just the material lies so that it doesn't have to be searched by scrolling around in a Facebook group all the time, because it can get kind of tedious to search certain material in between all of the other posts that are made every day. So yeah, I would really prefer using Discord for that, like for example my Discord group, and then people would feel more encouraged to participate if the things that they send in are just not buried by all of the other things that are being posted all the time. You feel more seen when the tool that you are using for such an event is more suited for the event, I think. So yeah, I want to make more of these kinds of events. And if you are interested in participating in an event like that, then you should definitely come around and we will do that. Or if you want to be the one who gives us a song that we can all mix, then you should definitely come around and propose your song. Don't be too perfectionistic. If you like your track, then your track is cool. And you can give me your track and then we make a nice challenge out of it. Yeah, that's my video to sum up this event. It was a lot of fun and I hope that we can repeat that.